As the war with Iran grinds on, the conversation in Washington is slowly shifting. Airstrikes have disrupted parts of Iran's missile and drone programs, but they haven't forced it to change course. That raises a familiar question in American wars. If air power is not enough, what comes next? Here is detailed report.
Some officials have begun discussing the possibility of ground operations. Trump has repeatedly said he does not want to take options off the table. Meanwhile, the military posture is already shifting. 2 Marine expeditionary units have been dispatched to the Persian Gulf, giving the White House additional military options should the conflict continue to escalate. And yes, there's still room for this to spiral. But talking about ground operations and actually carrying them out are 2 very different things. America has several ways it could introduce troops into Iran, from small special forces operations to limited territorial seizures or, in the most extreme scenario, a full invasion. Yet each step in that direction introduces new military and political complications. In practice, the deeper the United States tries to push into Iran, the more difficult it would be to sustain the war. Because while America needs victory, Iran only needs tomorrow. If American forces were to enter Iran, the most practical starting point would be special operations missions. The reason is partly political. Special operations tend to give the White House far more flexibility than conventional wars. Congress rarely tries to restrict these missions, and their secrecy often shields the political brass from immediate public backlash. For instance, during his first term in 2019, Trump approved a covert mission inside North Korea aimed at planting a listening device to intercept communications during the nuclear negotiations. The operation fell apart after the team encountered a fishing boat and opened fire, killing several civilians and forcing the mission to abort. And yet, the incident remained secret for years and produced little political fallout once it surfaced. Episodes like that help explain why special operations remain attractive to policymakers, both politically and militarily. Elite units such as Navy SEALs, Delta Force, or the Green Berets are designed for precisely this type of work. They can deploy quickly, operate in small numbers, and avoid the massive logistical footprint needed for conventional armies. These teams could launch from aircraft carriers or enter the country through Iran's long coastline and mountainous borders. Once inside Iran, there is no shortage of possible targets. Perhaps the most pressing objective is securing the stockpile of highly enriched uranium. Iran is believed to possess around 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to roughly 60%. No one knows the precise location. It could be near the city of Isfahan, where much of the nuclear research takes place, or even deep underground in Pickaxe Mountain. A raid to seize or neutralize that material could set back Iran's nuclear program. But there is a problem. The operation would take time, and time is exactly what special forces usually try to avoid. Extracting or diluting the material would require troops to remain on site long enough for Iranian forces to respond, so it would be a high-risk, high-reward operation. Other missions would be faster but also less decisive. Special forces could strike research facilities tied to Iran's nuclear program or sabotage factories connected to missile and drone production. These raids might slow Iran's military programs, but they wouldn't eliminate them. Iran's industrial networks are widely dispersed, and destroying one facility rarely shuts down the entire system. Assassinations of senior military commanders are another possibility, but Iran has a decentralized defense doctrine in which the IRGC is divided into 31 units, each commanded by a brigadier general. The units operate autonomously without approval from the central command in Tehran. So, removing individual leaders would cause disruption, but it wouldn't stop the country from launching missiles or drones. There is also the possibility of working with opposition groups inside Iran. Special forces might attempt to organize Kurdish militias or support underground networks in major cities. However, building an insurgency is not something that happens overnight. It takes years of preparation and depends on local political conditions that outsiders cannot easily control. Even if any of these operations succeeded tactically, they would carry political risk at home. The capture or death of American Special Operations troops would quickly become a national story. Washington still remembers the failed 1980 hostage rescue mission in Iran, Operation Desert Claw, which collapsed in the desert and helped doom Jimmy Carter's presidency. Any administration considering covert operations inside Iran knows how quickly a failed raid can turn into a political crisis. If Washington wants to escalate the war without committing to a full-scale invasion, the next step would likely involve limited territorial operations. Instead of trying to push deep into Iran, the United States could attempt to seize specific targets along the country's coastline or on nearby islands. Operations like these would likely fall to the US Marines. Their expeditionary units specialize in launching swift assaults along hostile coastlines. These forces operate from amphibious assault ships, using helicopters, landing craft, and tilt-rotor aircraft to move troops quickly onto contested territory. That capability is one reason the Pentagon has ordered 2 Marine expeditionary units numbering roughly 4,400 Marines to move toward the Persian Gulf to reinforce its military presence. However, this deployment does not necessarily mean an invasion is imminent. What it does provide is the ability to launch limited operations against Iran's coastal infrastructure if the conflict continues to widen. The most obvious targets would lie near the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's economy depends heavily on oil exports, and several islands and ports play an essential role in that system. In theory, the US could try to capture them. Islands such as Karg, Kish, and Keshem sit near crucial shipping routes. Taking control of these locations could give American forces greater leverage over the traffic in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. Marine expeditionary units operating with US carrier strike groups or airborne units could be used for such missions. On the flip side, Iran maintains a dispersed network of radar installations, missile batteries, and naval facilities along the nearby coastline, which allows it to monitor and target shipping traffic through the narrow waterway. US airstrikes may damage some of these sites, but the network itself is designed to survive bombardment through redundancy and mobility. Seizing or disabling key positions, particularly the islands of Abu Musa, Greater Tunb, and Lesser Tunb, and the coastal bases near Bandar Abbas, could temporarily weaken Tehran's ability to interfere with one of the world's most important energy corridors. That is exactly the type of mission Marine expeditionary units are built to carry out. Another potential objective would be Iran's oil export infrastructure. Karg Island, which handles the overwhelming majority of the country's crude shipments, has already been struck by American air power. US forces recently destroyed dozens of military installations on the island, targeting missile storage sites and naval mine facilities. But the energy infrastructure itself was deliberately left intact. That restraint leaves Washington with a powerful escalation option. If the war continues to widen, Trump could still choose to cripple Iran's export hub either through further airstrikes or by temporarily seizing the island. Beyond that, even more ambitious options have recently come into view. American forces could attempt to seize a major port such as Bandar Abbas or Chabahar, both of which are vital to Iran's maritime trade. Even the threat of a landing near large coastal cities could force Tehran to divert military forces away from other parts of the conflict. But amphibious assaults are among the most difficult operations in warfare. The United States has conducted landings in places like Panama in 1989, Beirut in 1958, and Haiti in 1994, but these were unopposed landings, meaning they were conducted without hostile fire. The last time America attempted a truly contested landing against a defended coastline was during the Korean War in 1950. Doing so today would expose landing forces to drones, anti-ship missiles, coastal defenses, and artillery. Even if the initial assault succeeded, American troops could quickly find themselves fighting in dense urban areas where many of their technological advantages begin to fade. Moreover, the geography and distance of such an operation favor Tehran. Iranian forces would be operating close to their own bases, supply lines, and missile systems, while American troops would depend on ships and regional bases that could themselves become targets. For that reason, focusing on Iran's isolated islands is a far more manageable objective than the large coastal cities. Yet perhaps the hardest question of all is what happens after. Capturing territory is one thing, holding it and eventually getting out is something else entirely. The final option, and the most dramatic one, would be a full-scale invasion. One aimed either at dismantling Iran's conventional military forces or bringing down the Islamic Republic altogether. But an operation of this scale would come at an enormous cost. For comparison, the invasion of Iraq in 2003 required more than 6 months to assemble around 200,000 soldiers in the region. Iran, however, is larger in size and population and is more mountainous, so the required number of troops and resources would be many times that of the Iraqi experience. The United States would also need regional support. Neighboring countries would have to host American troops and allow supply lines to run through their territory. Yet, few governments appear to have an appetite for total war. Then, there is the political challenge at home. A war of this scale would require massive funding and long-term commitment. Under US law, Congress would almost certainly need to approve such an operation. Without broad public support, sustaining a prolonged ground war would be extremely difficult. Fortunately, we're not there yet. A full-scale invasion is unlikely. Only a major economic or military blow from Iran would be enough to push public opinion toward a ground war. Assuming that obstacles such as funding, mobilization, popular support, and regional logistics were overcome, Washington could then begin assembling the forces required for a full-scale invasion.
If Washington wants to escalate without a full-scale invasion, the next step would likely involve limited territorial operations. The most obvious targets would lie near the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's economy depends heavily on oil exports. Taking control of islands such as Karg, Kish, and Keshem could give American forces greater leverage over the traffic in the Persian Gulf. The final option, and the most dramatic one, would be a full-scale invasion aimed at bringing down the Islamic Republic altogether. But an operation of this scale would come at an enormous cost. Iran is larger, more mountainous, and more populated than Iraq. A full-scale invasion of Iran would be nothing short of a strategic disaster. There would be no quick victory. It would likely unfold over months or years, especially if the United States relied on proxy forces. Rather than committing to a direct advance into the Iranian interior, and even then victory on the battlefield, would only mark the beginning of a far longer phase. Iran's population is large, its terrain is difficult, and stabilizing the country could tie down American forces for years, if not decades. All it would do is drain American resources away from Europe and Asia, and when a superpower is busy in one theater, its rivals rehearse in another.